Alright, today I'm going to go through the rest of the chapters of the player's handbook. So chapter 1 was the character creation. So then in chapter 2 you can see right here, which starts on page 17, is called choosing a race. So this basically goes over the race. Like for instance, one of the races like a dwarf. So what it does is it goes through it gives a little paragraph or whatever from one of the stories. So this one is from the one of the Forgotten Realms. It is from the book The Crystal Shard by R.A. Salvatore. So pretty much a line from Bruner, who's a dwarf, and that series is a part of the Drizzt series, who's a renegade drow type of deal. So if you don't know those books, it's part of the Forgotten Realms, so you definitely need to want to check it out and everything. So what it does is gets into a actual description of the actual race, and it gives here in a brief description on relations that general relations that a dwarves would have with the other races and everything. So then next page, what it does, it actually gives you a list of dwarven names, first names for men and women, that you can female male names. So you can you don't necessarily have to play a male or female. You could play with the great thing about D&D is you can play you could quite possibly play a non-binary character too. So you can the only limitation you have for creating a character is based on your imagination, so it pretty much leaves it wide open. So what it does then do is it gets into the traits though, after you pick a name and stuff, for instance, a ability score increase. What it does, I know last time when I was doing the character creation, I did increases and decreases, because based on third edition, you'd have an increase to one ability and a decrease to another. But here in fifth edition, you just have increases. For instance, the ability score increase for a dwarf would be a +2 to Constitution, and it gets a brief description about age, and then it talks about alignment. And now alignment is whether you're chaotic or lawful, or in between being neutral, and also whether the other three is whether you're good, evil, or neutral. So there's 9 different types of combinations that you could do with the alignment. So you could go from the at 2 ends of the spectrum. Being lawful good would be someone who's following the laws and who's completely good, to chaotic evil. Someone who's a prime example would be probably the devil or Satan from Christian mythology. And then it gets into the size. Most characters that you create with these races would be medium size, and this is under you can see the traits that they get. So it says dwarves get dark vision, which lets them see in the dark type of deal. They get you can a thing called dwarven resilience, dwarven combat training. So it goes into the whole characteristics, and also it gives a couple existence of examples of in a sense sub races that you could do. Dwarf here would be an umbrella term, and then sub races would be the hill dwarf or mountain dwarf. So in real life, if you're playing a sub race of humans or something, in real life, if you're playing a human from North America versus a human from Africa or something, so you could have a sub races like that. So another race, the character I made the other time, was an elf, and it goes into the same thing, with elf traits and sub races, and also a explanation of how, in general terms, the elves deal with the other races and everything. So and it gives sub races for the elves. And next one is the halfling, which would be a sort of the hobbits from Lord of the Rings. And of course it gets into the humans next, and the same deal. It goes through the whole description of over here, how they, in general terms, they go along with the other races, the character traits, different sub races of humans, and you can also play what's known as a Dragonborn, not the Dragonborn from Skyrim, but Dragonborn, someone the most famous would probably be the Draconians from Dragonlance. So as a Dragonborn, you're kind of a humanoid type dragon, or someone who's of dragon descent type of deal. So like I said, an example would be the Draconians from the Dragonlance series, and of course you got gnomes, and then just like everything else, they have the traits, the brief description on how they get to along with other races, and also their traits, their sub races and stuff, and you can also play a character which is half elf, which is a human elf, a hybrid type of deal. So they're half elf, half human type of deal, and just like anything, it goes into the traits, the there is no sub races or whatever, and it's the same thing with a half orc. A half orc is half orc, half human, and so each race, there's a stereotypical class that they get into. The half orc here, the stereotypical class would be the barbarian. The human would probably be a fighter, and same thing with the dwarf. And the elf would probably be a stereotypical one, would be a ranger. And so each, you don't necessarily have to do the necessarily a stereotype. You can like I said, you're only limited by your imagination. So a tiefling here is kind of sort of a demonic type race, that at least in the stereotype of that one. So because they're in a sense a descendant of demons and everything. So that's kind of the stereotypes of those, and so they're a stereotypical class would be the sorcerer. So but again, you don't necessarily have to get into the stereotypical classes or whatever. So and which leads into the next chapter, which is chapter 3, and that goes over the classes. So I'm going down alphabetically with the whole list here. You got the barbarian, the bard, the cleric, druid, fighter, monk, paladin, ranger, rogue, sorcerer, warlock, and wizard. Now your fighting classes, people your warrior type would be someone your barbarian and your fighter, and those would be a barbarian would pretty much be from history would probably be a Viking berserker, would be a prime example of that. A prime example of a fighter would be your typical knight in shining armor, and a monk is a kind of your Bruce Lee type fighter who he uses unarmed combat to do battle instead of picking up swords and axes the fighters or barbarians. And then your paladin would be in a sense your holy knight, someone who's the defender of the church type of deal. So and ranger is kind of your in a sense your archer or something. Aragorn in the first part, Fellowship of the Ring, as Strider would be a perfect example of the ranger. Your rogue is basically in a sense your thief and everything, someone who sneaks around, picks pockets, and is able to disarm traps and stuff like that. Your sorcerer, warlock, and wizard are what's known as arcane spellcasters, and they use what's the arcane magic to in a sense create spells and everything. So think of someone like Gandalf, who is able to in a sense cast spells and everything, but here in D&D, it's a lot more a planet busting type of deal. It's a lot more bigger scale with cast, and so then what you do is you got with your cleric and druid, you got what they're known as divine spellcasters. So they, in a sense, a cleric will draw his power from a specific god or goddess to be able to cast a spell. So unlike the wizard who can sit there and study books to cast his magic, a cleric in a sense prays to God to like be able to cast the spells in a sense like to heal people and like in a sense like create water and like act as like a healer. And like a druid is the same kind of concept, but they're more nature based and everything. So like this whole chapter goes through for instance, like it gets into like the whole description of the character. It goes through like what abilities and traits you'd be getting as you level up and everything. So like the more levels you get, the more abilities you get, and like it also like explains on like the hit point system. So hit points in a sense is like how much damage you can actually take in combat and everything. So like for instance, someone like the barbarian here has like a what's known as like a hit dice. So it's like a specific dice that you would roll to gain hit points and everything per level. So like they get like they use the 12-sided dice to gain hit points. And so like versus like someone like the wizard would only use maybe like a d6, because a barbarian is designed more for like the combat than a wizard is. And so like then flipping the page, you can see like they get into like the actual like the descriptions of the abilities that you get per every single level, and the ones you start off with at the first level. So like this whole chapter will give like a whole description on each of the classes, their abilities, the stuff like their hit points, and like their starting equipment, and it goes like really into depth on like what you get for each class and everything. And of course, like with the wizard, it has like the several different types of schools of magic that you can learn. And then you get into chapter 4, which is like your personality and your background. So like this is kind of where you can kind of flesh out your character. So like you can start out like picking your name, like your sex and stuff like that. You can also deal like with like the races determine your height and weight type of deal. And like you can also learn like different types of languages and everything that like you can read, write, and speak in. And like it also gets into like the 9 different types of alignments that like I mentioned, and it gives a description on like how using an alignment, and it's how the type of character like your character would act and everything, depending on whether like you're lawful good or like a chaotic evil, like for like example as before. So then it gets into like the actual like backgrounds, like maybe like with the like the, for instance, like the first one here, acolyte, would be someone like in a sense like who would be like a part of like a church life or something, and like you could use that as like a background for like a cleric or something. So like and of course you got like a criminal, someone who would you could use that background for like a thief or something, or like a rogue. So like these backgrounds are like something that like lets you flesh out your character instead of just maybe being like a like for instance like the criminal background they could use as like a rogue, or like what you could do like you could use like the noble here and be like a rogue in a sense. Like you could in a sense play 2 different types of rogues with like just using different types of backgrounds and everything. So like and what it does is like it breaks it down into like you can pick like a personality trait, something that like for instance with the sailor right here, like one of your traits could be that my friends know they can rely on me no matter what, would be like a personality trait type of deal. Then you can get into like what's known as an ideal, which is like something that like in a sense motivates you. Like for instance with like a sailor, like you could have the ideal of respect. It's the thing that keeps the ship together is mutual respect between captain and crew, and that's kind of geared more towards like a good aligned character. So like that's what like an ideal would be like. And you also like can pick like a bond that you have, and also a flaw as well. And there's like several different ones, and then you get into chapter 5, which is gets into the actual equipment. So like the character classes, they actually have like like a brief quick build description, and what they do is like they give you like a basic like a equipment that you can start out with. Like if you just want to get kind of like get started real quick, you can just look at the quick build list and be like, okay, so they're giving me this type of equipment and everything. Or what you can do is like use this table and roll like the certain amount of dice or whatever that they say, and then times it by 10, which gives you like a starting amount of gold, and like it shows like a picture of like the actual like uh, 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 piece, like a gold piece, silver piece, platinum, and stuff like that. The actual money that you use. So what you can do is in sense like a buy armor, buy weapons, and like of course it gives like a whole table and like a description of the weapons and like a how like a like for instance the actual weapon name gives like how much they cost, uh, how much damage they do, and types of damage. So like for instance like a sword would be kind of like more based on slashing type of damage versus like a say you pick up a hammer, which would be more bludgeoning type of damage. So like it gives a description on how much and what type of damage that you're dealing with weapons. It also like gives like a brief description like on like what it's like how it's used type of deal. And the same thing like for like the armor right here. It gives like a description of like whether you're wearing like light armor, like something like just you getting like some leather or something, all the way to like heavy armor, sort of like the plate mail that like the knight in shining armor example would use. And it gives like the what's known as armor class. And armor class is like in a sense like how good you are at either deflecting or dodging an attack and everything. So like for instance like with the attacks like you have to get to the actual D20, which is pretty much the go-to dice in this game. To make an attack, what you do is you roll a D20. So like you'll add like you'll roll the D20 and say you get a 15. What you do is if you have like any modifiers, like for instance like say you're good at attacking, you get like a +5. What you do is add that +5 and you get a 20. And what you do is you look at the armor class, and so like if with the 20, anything like 20 or below, you would be able to hit with that roll. Anything 21 or above, you'd miss and everything. So that's how AC versus attack works and everything. So like so that's like a basic on how like combat works. And then like further in the chapter of the equipment, it actually gets into like the specifics like clothes and like backpacks and like tents and like torches, food, and basically like stuff that like you'd use like on an adventure, sort of like stuff that you pick up like for instance like for like if you go out for a hike type of deal. So like it gets into like all your knickknacks, and also later in this chapter like of course like it talks about like some of the tools that you come across and like musical instruments as well. It also get into like mounts or like horses and like maybe even ships and stuff. So it's like a whole chapter on like all the equipment that you'd use or come across, not just weapons and armor, but also like your day-to-day stuff that you use for like a turning on a torch, like a lighting a torch as you get into the enter into a dungeon. So then like chapter 6 is like actually like it gets into like your customization options. So like a big one with that would be like multi-classing. So like for instance like say you start off as like a barbarian. What you can do instead of like, and once you level up to like level 2, the concept of multi-classing is like instead of taking like a second level in barbarian, what you can do is instead take a level in fighter. So like you could become a level 1 barbarian, level 1 fighter. And now what they do is they have prerequisites. So like for instance that example I just used, being a barbarian, if I wanted to like become a fighter, what I would need to do is look at the prerequisite. I need a strength of 13 or a dexterity of 13. So like if I had that prerequisite, I'd be able to multi-class in that. So then you'd pretty much go about and get all the benefits and like the traits and stuff of that character class that you do. So like that's the concept of like multi-classing. And so like what they do in here is also get into what is known as feats, which give you like in a sense something like a specific ability or whatever. Like for instance, like dual wielder, like it says you master fighting with two weapons, gaining the following benefits. So when you take this, you get like a +1 bonus to AC when you are wielding a separate melee weapon in two hands. So in a sense, you got like two swords in each hand instead of a sword and shield type of deal. And you can like it says you can use two weapon fight even when the one hand melee weapons you are wielding aren't light. So like for instance, like instead of like dual wielding like with daggers, this lets you dual wield with maybe two long swords type of deal. So this is what feats do. There it's like something specific that gives you like a bonus to like a certain like instances, like the dual wielding example that I just used. And like of course like the heavy armor master is like another one that you can pick up. So like yeah, there's a lot that are more geared towards like class specific. So like this is stuff like for instance like with the the dual wielder one, like that's geared more towards like someone who's like a fighter or maybe a barbarian could pick that up as well. So like if like you're someone like a sorcerer or a cleric or something, that might not necessarily make as much sense. So what you got to do is look at your character type of deal and look at like, okay, what feats do I want to pick up that would in a sense enhance my character as I'm building it out. So that's what the basically feats are. So like then we get into like the second part of the book, which is like chapter 7 is using your ability score. So like for instance, like you're doing like for ability score modifiers, like stuff that you use to like either subtract or add. So like for instance, like an ability score check would be like for instance a strength check, like if a gate like an iron gate and the castle is starting to close and you're trying to run through and escape as a group, what you can do is do a strength check to hold the gate open as the rest of the guys would try to escape. So like when you sit there and you try to hold it up like with your strength, what you do is you'd roll a strength check on a d20. So like the DC or difficulty check would be like say maybe like a 15. So what you do is you roll a d20, which is the go-to dice of the game pretty much, and say I'm the barbarian and I have like a strength of like a 20. I look at it, gives me a +5 modifier. So say like like I said, the DC is 15. What I would need to roll, I'd have to use a D20 to roll 15 or better. So say on that roll, on the D20 I roll 11. I had my +5 strength modifier, which would give me 16. With it being a DC of 15, that means that 16 I would succeed on holding that gate up so people could escape and everything. So like it also talks about like advantage and disadvantage. So like with that, like you roll 2d20. So like instead of just rolling one, you roll a second 20-sided dice. And with advantage, you take the better of the two. With disadvantage, you take the worst of the two. So like for instance, like with the 2d20s, say I roll a 13 and a 17. With advantage, I would take the 17. With the disadvantage, I would take the 13. So that's how advantage and disadvantage works. So like the DM would determine whether you like in the like for instance in combat, what like if you were at advantage, like maybe you had like a surprise attack or whatever. So like you could end up like it being an advantage to use that 17. Now, like on the flip side, if you guys were surprised in combat, say like all of a sudden like the orcs turn around the corner, they surprise you because you didn't expect them to come or something. Rolling that 13 and 17 to attack, I would take now the 13 instead, and so that's how advantage and disadvantage works, and it gets into like a proficiency bonus and like the ability checks that like I explained like has like the difficulty class like it depends on whether it's something that's like it goes up, depends like very easy would be something like the table shows like a 5, and would all the way to nearly impossible, which would be a DC of like 30 type of deal. So rolling like a d20 to find out if you succeeded or not. So this also gets into actually using your abilities, like I said, for your that strength check that to hold the gate open that I used as an example. So you can use each ability for dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, charisma, to determine when you're using one your abilities to see if you succeeded at something or whatever. And also you got saving throws, for instance you drink you're at the tavern and you drink an ale and someone had poisoned it. What you do is you use a saving throw to see if you would actually resist the poison type of deal. So that's an example of a saving throw. And then chapter 8 is the whole getting into the concept of adventure, and so it depicts in a sense time. So for instance, in combat, time is measured in what's called rounds, which tends to be probably about 3 or 4 seconds long. And if you're not in combat and you're traveling, what you do is you do, in a sense track time with hours and days and stuff. So this chapter pretty much gets into more of the nuances of the actual adventures. And chapter 9 is all about dealing with combat. So the attack AC attack, and this is where that comes into play. And there's this thing called initiative, which is basically determines who goes when, and it's in a turn-based style of combat. So for sort of in the original Final Fantasy games, you attack, they attack, you attack, they attack type of deal. So everyone rolls initiative on a d20, and whoever gets the highest goes first, and then you work your way down to say I rolled a 20 and you rolled a 17. What I would do with the 20 is I'd be able to go first, and then you rolled a 17, you'd go next. And then say an orc came along and rolled a 7, then they'd go third type of deal. So this whole chapter is pretty much on how you can also in a sense use miniatures on on a hexagon map, and how you move them, and it tracks. That's where the speed comes into play. So this whole chapter is not just about attacking AC, but how people actually can cast spells in combat too. So then part 3 is pretty much all about spells. So chapter 10 goes over spellcasting, the arcane and divine magic that I talked about that the classes get. So it also gives a picture on how each spell, if I would say it would be whether in a line or cone, how a spell would affect a certain area type of deal. So then in chapter 11 you pretty much get the whole spells, the whole list of all the spells that each class would be able to use. So it goes into each class and gives them different levels of spells. So you have spells ranging from cantrips at 0, which are pretty much your in a sense your tricks and stuff that you learn quite you can pretty much pick up just like that. And your first level spells are some your basic spells and everything that you learn early on. And so as the levels go from first, all second to third, all the way up to 9th level, they become harder and harder to cast. But they're a lot more planet busting type of deal. So for instance, if I were to cast, if I'm a sorcerer and I was to cast a first level spell, I could maybe cast one of the well-known ones called Magic Missile, which would in a sense let me cast a spell that would act as a magical arrow type of deal that I could attack people with. and like roll like maybe like a dice to do damage with that spell instead of like a weapon. So it goes all the way up to like maybe ninth level where I could maybe cast like a wish spell, which I could cast it on a successful cast. I could grant someone like a wish. So like say the barbarian wished to increase his strength ability by 2, and I would be able to cast that. And if I succeeded, he'd be able to increase it by 2. So like the as the levels go up, like they're harder to cast, but they're like the effects are a lot more, in a sense, planet busted. So then, like it go not only goes into like the list that each class can use, it gives like a description like, on like on the whole on what each spell does and everything. So like for instance, like a chain lightning here, it gives like a description of like yeah, casting time, range, the components that you need to be able to cast that, duration. It would actually give a description on like what it actually does and everything. So like it does this for like the pretty much all spells. So one way to like instead of flipping through like the book like this, searching for spells, what you can do is there's like they're not necessary, but what you can do is pick up like for instance, this is like a spellbook cards on for the bard. While they're not necessary, they're optional. They do come in handy. So like instead of flipping through the book like this for your spells, what you can do is grab one of those and pick out the actual spells that you have like for your specific class and everything. So like then in the back of the book, we actually get into like appendices, like where like for instance, like appendix A right here, it gets into like conditions that you might be affected by. So like for instance, like the picture here, like you're getting charmed, so like someone successfully seduces you type of deal, which would be one of the conditions. And so like and then so that's that appendix. And then in appendix B, it goes into like the different pantheons that you can use. So what it does, it gives like this gives a description on like the deities that you would find in each of the realms. Like for instance, like right here, Dragonlance setting. So if you were playing a Dragonlance campaign, it would give you all the different gods that are in that world. And of course, it also gets into like if you wanted to use historical pantheons, so like if you wanted to say use the Celtic or the Nordic pantheon as a set of gods, it gives you a whole like a list of what you can do if you wanted to use something like that. So like they also have like Greek and Egyptian as well. So like and then in appendix D or C, I mean, it gives like the different planes. Now most of the time you're going to be on what is known as the material plane, which is basically the world. And so like this actually gets into like the different types of planes, whether like you go to, in a sense like into hell or heaven, or like maybe you go to purgatory. So like it gives you different planes that you can actually travel to. A brief description on that. So like appendix D, creature statistics. So this gives you like a rundown of like stats that you can use for specific like creatures. Like you can see right here, a black bear. It gives you the whole stats that you can use like to run an encounter that people have like a black bear. So like this is why like going through this, you don't necessarily need the Dungeon Master's Guide or the Monster Manual, even though those would be good pickups and everything. So like because with the monsters here, you have more than enough to be able to run or at least get started on your own adventure and everything. So this is pretty much the player's handbook. And of course, like the last one is like inspirational reading, so books that you could like fantasy books that you could get into. And of course it also has like a index on like the different words and like concepts that you can find throughout the whole book and everything. So like in the back they also have like of course like I've taken out like the character sheet, but this is the spell list for it. So like they have a character sheet in the back that you can like pull out and then like go to like your local library and make a copy of. So in essence, this is the only book you really need to be able to run a D&D campaign. Even though like you can get the others. So like usually books like these run around $50 or whatever. So like now like with the starter set, like I said, you can get that for like $20, $25 or so, which is in a sense like a condensed version of this. But like that's only limited in the sense that you have like it's a condensed version of the rules in here, and you have that just one adventure. So like the starter set or like an essentials kit also, which I'll be getting into like eventually. You can get one of those to kind of get started and everything. So it could that could get you like an adventure that like if you meet weekly, you could probably go for like a month or two, maybe expand it into like expand on that adventure into 3 or 4 months. So with this right here, this would let you continue the adventure on afterwards and everything. So like and again, this is like the only one you would in a sense really need. But like if you really want to get in more into depth and everything, the Dungeon Master Guide and the Monster Manual would be the next two to get and everything. So like especially if like you're a DM, those two would probably be best to get like if you get into Dungeon Master in. So but as again, this is pretty much the only one that you would in a sense absolutely need to continue your adventure. So next week I'll be getting into the Dungeon Master Guide, and after that I'll actually be getting into the Monster Manual.